Hi, Professor. It's Graham. What I actually did was I kind of wrote an essay based on my experiences on this because I don't really do art or anything like that. I don't know what you want. So I just kind of wrote because I feel like that's like what I do best. So I'll read it to you and then I'll email you a copy of what I wrote. So here I'm going to read it for you. I'm not the most creative person as far as art goes. I do play music, but I just could not write a song on command as the project calls for. I was really at a loss given all the freedom we have for this assignment. But then something happened as I read the book. My greatest gift as a writer, so I hope my story of reading this book is acceptable. I was given a copy of this book about 8 years ago, just after my father passed away. I think that same week I was also given the DVD of the movie Big Fish, which is an incredible movie. After watching that film, I cracked open The Shack for the first time, not knowing anything as to what it was about. I remember being captivated as Mac received the note, drove up to the shack, heard all the noises outside, and then finally made it to the shack and was breaking down. Then I proceeded to almost vomit. And the reason why I did that was because the whole Trinity thing happened. I had been duped. I was not a Christian, in fact, very far from it. I resented basically the whole community that I'm involved in now. My argument was the standard hypocritical, bigoted Christians, etc. Yet I was lost after my dad passed away, so I kept reading. It didn't get any better. I thought, and still do, I think the book is very poorly written. The author spends way too much time on inconsequential facts, like how the food tastes and what the view was like from Mac's window. There's just too much filler. I had to stop near the end of the book all those years ago because it was just too vague and silly to me. So when I saw this on the syllabus, I cringed and hoped that maybe this time around I would enjoy it more. Perhaps now that I was transformed by Christ, it would take on a new meaning. Well, it didn't. Not really, anyways. Still poorly written. I also think that sometimes us Christians tend to love anything that has to do with Jesus and don't really judge the work based on its merits, but only its message. That, I believe, is a mistake. As a result, a whole lot of people are listening to really crappy music and reading really crappy books just because it has to do with Jesus. Maybe this has to do with my secular past and the passion I put into the music industry for 10 years while reading a lot of the great literary works. Maybe I'm overly cynical. I have come around to worship music, though, however, so there you go, which is absolutely an act of God and definitely not my doing. But I still kind of think that The Shack is a fluff book. Um, I don't have a problem with presenting the Trinity as a large black woman from the South or a Middle Eastern man. I know a lot of people were worked up about that. I think it's a pretty clever idea, though, just the execution wasn't very good. As Mac questions himself in the book, why should I assume that God would be white? It's a good point, and so I thought it was thought provoking. So in that sense, I liked it. Um, I just saw the potential this time around, but became disappointed all over again. However, this is the part that maybe you'll like, or maybe I'll get some points for after I just bash the book. Um, Reading this book as a Christian has made me appreciate God in a new way, even despite how I feel about it. When Mac receives the note from God in his mailbox, it reminds me that you never really know when God will be asking you to do something or to get to know Him better. I think all of us believe we know God better than we actually do. It is in these moments when He calls us that we realize that we do not. We don't necessarily get a note in our mailbox, but He shows us in His way. And we don't get dragged to a literal shack, but He often takes us to places that we would rather forget. A big part of my journey had to deal with issues from my past. I was a very nasty and mean person at times, and I caused a lot of harm and pain to people. I heard I heard what people do in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where they ask people for forgiveness and make amends to them. I actually did this myself and made a list of those people I hurt, whether they knew it or not. Most people responded well, and some didn't want to talk to me. Yet I still made the effort, and it literally healed me. I didn't have to carry that guilt around anymore. I kind of felt like Mac did with the great sadness. Yet when he called me to do this, I resisted at first because it was very uncomfortable. And I resisted certain amends once I started the process because I thought those particular people would be too difficult. But eventually I did face them all. Another significant theme in this book that moved me was Mac's struggle to forgive the murderer. Certainly most could understand why he wouldn't, but in God's explanation in the book, he reminds us that the killer is God's child too. There is a point in the book where God tells him to literally say, I forgive you, over and over each day. And while he may not mean it right away, or even after a few days, he will eventually forgive that man. It's sort of like fake it till you make it. It's an expression I heard. This hit me hard because I'm very resentful right now to my ex-girlfriend. I really did give my all, and she broke my heart. Since reading this, each time anger or bitterness wells up in me, I just say, Janet, I forgive you. And to be honest, I don't really mean it. Yet it still has a way of breaking the negativity in that moment, and I can resume my life. I know that I will forgive her for rejecting me, and I feel like I have already begun the process. I am confident because I have been able to do so in the past. I also heard the quote once that resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Again, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. That's a very powerful statement, and staying angry only hurts me, not her. You have to choose to forgive and ask God for help in it. I believe this passage, right from the book, is God's way of showing me that I needed to forgive her. And what the passage says was, every time we forgive, the universe changes. Every time we reach out and touch a heart and a life, the world changes. With every kindness, seen or unseen, my purposes are accomplished, and nothing will be the same again. And again, that's straight from the book. God chose this moment to remind me of that. I should be focusing on doing good and forgiving her rather than being angry. Enough is enough. I had my moments to be mad. Now I must try to forgive her, and eventually I will be successful. Um, but perhaps the most significant part of this book for me is what it has inspired me to do. I have my own personal shack in my life. It's an apartment in Chicago where my sister lived and she died in it. I went there many times to visit, and the last time I was there was after she died, a few hours after they took her body out. Um, she had been there for 5 days. The place smelled of death, which is an undeniable smell. There were pieces of her head on the ground, and I had to walk over them since they took her body out so quickly and it had decayed so bad. It just fell off. Um, that was almost 5 years ago, and I haven't been back to Chicago since. I passed on going there a few times. I really miss my sister a lot, and there's a big part of me that hasn't dealt with it properly. When I read what Mac was experiencing when he saw the shack again, it dawned on me that maybe I need to return to this place for closure. I obviously wouldn't knock on the door and tell the current tenant the story, but to just go by and walk the neighborhood where she lived again would be very special. I had a voucher from a canceled flight, and I booked a ticket for this very Wednesday. I will head there and think of her. At night I will go to a Cubs game since Wrigley Field is close to her place. Then I will stay with my friend and head home the next day. I am not expecting to meet the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but you never know. So to sum up my experience, I really didn't like the book. Yet the book managed to change me, or rather I should say that God changed me. I didn't expect this going into reading the book. I am amazed that God can use these things to change us in ways we never expected, just like God did with Mac. Also, kind of as a side note, I also appreciated in a way that he had Mac get in the accident after he was coming back from the shack. I think it goes to show that it doesn't mean that life will be perfect once we find God. But Mac knew that God was with him in a way he hadn't before. And that's exactly how I felt after reading this book. So thank you very much, and I'll see you later.